I, Kaelin of the Silver Moon, reject you. Those 6 words didn't just break our bond, they shattered my soul. For years, I made myself smaller. I dimmed the radiant power of my rare white spirit so my alpha could shine like a god before the pack. I loved him. I trusted him. I believed he would protect me. But today, the man I once worshipped snapped a silver collar around my throat and traded me away like a common slave. A peace offering. A gift for the monstrous king of the outcasts. Kaelin believes he's discarding a weak, broken woman, sending me to the butcher. But he's made a fatal mistake. Because the woman he threw away isn't weak. And the king he fears? He's the only man powerful enough to awaken the truth of what I am. Kaelin doesn't know it yet, but he just handed the most dangerous weapon in the world to the only king capable of teaching me how to use it. You're listening to The Rogue's Coronation, a full-length shifter romance audiobook written by Grace Cruz. Subscribe to this channel and join our growing community of romance lovers. And now, the real story begins. Chapter 1, The Shattered Soul. I, Kaelin of the Silver Moon, reject you, Seraphina, as my mate and my future queen. The words didn't just hurt, they ripped. They tore through Seraphina's chest like a jagged blade made of ice. She stood on the stage in her white silk dress. It was supposed to be her wedding day. The sun was bright. The hall smelled like fresh lavender and sweet pine. But as the bond snapped, the world turned gray. Her heart felt like it was exploding. Before the pain even settled, Kaelin stepped closer. He didn't look sad. He looked bored. He looked like he was throwing away a broken toy. He was tall and handsome with gold hair. Every girl in the pack wanted him. Seraphina had loved him since they were kids. She had healed his wounds. She had kept his secrets. She had hidden her own power, the rare white spirit, just to make him feel big. Kaelin, please, she choked out. Her voice was a thin whisper. Why? Look at you, Seraphina, he sneered. His voice was loud so everyone could hear. You are just a healer. You are weak. You are soft. A king needs a warrior. A king needs a woman who can kill, not a woman who cries over a scratched knee. He reached out and grabbed her chin. His fingers dug into her skin. It hurt, but the pain in her soul was worse. Around them, the pack members watched. Nobody moved. Nobody helped. They just stared with cold eyes. They had always looked at her like she was just a tool, a bandage to be used and thrown away. You are a gift, Seraphina, Kaelin whispered in her ear. His breath smelled like mint and cruelty. King Valerius wants a healer for his monsters. I am giving you to him, to save our pack, to buy us peace. You should be happy. You are finally useful. She wanted to scream. She wanted to shift into her giant glowing white wolf and tear his throat out. But she couldn't. If she shifted, everyone would see what she really was. They would hunt her. They would sell her bones. She had to stay small. She had to stay quiet. Behind the altar, a heavy silver collar waited on a velvet pillow. It looked like a pretty necklace, but it wasn't. It was a noose. It was a cage. And Kaelin was reaching for it with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Chapter 2. The Silver Noose. Meanwhile, in the back of the hall, the shadows seemed to grow teeth. 2 men stood there. They didn't wear silver. They wore black leather. They smelled like blood and old forests. They were the envoys of King Valerius, the Tyrant King, the man who ate hearts for breakfast, or so the stories said. Seraphina watched them through her tears. They looked like predators watching a wounded rabbit. Kaelin picked up the silver collar. It clicked. The sound was like a bone breaking. He stepped behind her. His touch made her skin crawl. He wrapped the cold metal around her neck. Snap. The collar was heavy. It was freezing. As soon as it locked, Seraphina felt her wolf go silent. The magic was gone. The connection to the earth was gone. She felt hollow. She felt like a ghost. The silver burned her skin, but she couldn't even pull away. "There," Kalen said. He patted her cheek. "Now you won't run. Now you will be a good little peace offering." You sold me," she whispered. Her eyes burned. "You were my mate. You promised to protect me." "I am protecting the pack," Kalen barked. He turned to the two men in black. "She is yours. Take her. Tell your king the Silver Moon Pack pays its debts. Tell him she is the best healer we have. Tell him. Tell him she is nothing to me." One of the men stepped forward. He was huge. He had a scar across his nose. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed the chain attached to Seraphina's collar. He pulled. Hard. Seraphina stumbled. She fell to her knees on the hard stone floor. The pack laughed, her own friends, her own family. They laughed as she was dragged like a dog across the floor. She looked back at Kalen one last time. He was already looking at a pretty girl in the front row. He was already moving on. He didn't care that her heart was bleeding out on the marble. He didn't care that he was sending her to a monster. Moments later, the world went dark as a black hood was pulled over her head. Chapter 3. Into the Mist. Across the jagged mountain pass, the wind howled like a dying beast. Seraphina sat in the back of a wagon. Her hands were tied. The silver collar felt like it was getting heavier every hour. It was hard to breathe. It was hard to think. Every time the wagon hit a rock, her head slammed against the wood. The two men didn't talk much. They just grunted. They smelled like wet fur and wood smoke. They were rogues, outcasts. The kind of wolves Seraphina had been taught to fear. In the Silver Moon Pack, rogues were trash. They were crazy. They were dangerous. And now, she was one of them. "Think he'll like her?" the smaller one asked. His voice was raspy. "The king likes anything he can use," the big one replied. "And look at her. She's tiny, pale, like a little ghost. She won't last a week in the sanctuary." Seraphina curled into a ball. A ghost. That's what she felt like. She tried to reach for her wolf. "Spirit? Are you there?" But there was only silence. The silver collar was a wall. It was a cage. She was alone in her own head. She thought about her infirmary. She thought about the herbs she had dried. She thought about the little boy whose fever she had broken just yesterday. Would anyone take care of them now? Or would Kalen let them suffer too? Suddenly, the wagon stopped. The horses whinnied in fear. The air got cold. Very cold. Seraphina felt a prickle on the back of her neck. Something was out there. Something big. "What is that?" the smaller man whispered. He sounded scared. "Shh," the big one said. He pulled his sword. Swing. "Stay in the wagon, girl. Don't move." A growl ripped through the air. It wasn't a wolf growl. It was deeper, like the earth itself was angry. It sounded like hunger. It sounded like death. Seraphina squeezed her eyes shut. She was trapped in a box, in a collar, with her hands tied. She was a healer with no magic. She was a mate with no love. She was a spirit with no light. Hours passed like a slow death as she waited for the screaming to start. Chapter 4. The Shadow in the Woods. But the screaming never came. Instead, there was a heavy thud. Then another. Then silence. The wagon rocked. The back door creaked open. Seraphina shivered. She pressed her back against the wooden wall. The hood was still over her head. She couldn't see, but she could smell. The smell was different now. It wasn't the sweaty, bloody smell of the two guards. It was rain. It was ozone. It was the smell of a storm right before it breaks. It was powerful. It was dark. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever smelled. A large, warm hand grabbed her arm. It didn't squeeze. It just held her. "Don't kill me," she whispered. Her voice was shaky. "Please, I'm just a healer." The hand moved up. Long, calloused fingers brushed against her neck. They touched the silver collar. The metal hissed. The person holding her let out a low, rumbling sound. A purr? No, a growl. But it wasn't a mean growl. It was angry. Angry at the collar. Silver, a deep voice said. It was like velvet and gravel mixed together. They put silver on a female. Cowards. The hood was yanked off her head. Seraphina blinked. The moonlight was bright. She saw the two guards. They weren't dead. They were pinned to the ground by shadows. Actual shadows that moved like snakes. And then she saw him. He was a giant. He had dark hair that fell into his eyes. His face was covered in scars. One went right across his eye. His eyes were the color of molten gold. They glowed in the dark. He looked like a nightmare. He looked like the Tyrant King from the stories. He looked like the monster who was supposed to eat her. "Are you Valerius?" she asked. Her heart was pounding so hard it hurt. "I am the man who bought you," he said. He leaned in close. His heat was like a furnace. "And I don't like my property in chains. It makes them useless." He reached for the collar. His bare hands touched the silver. It burned him. She saw the smoke rising from his skin. But he didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just gripped the lock and twisted. Chapter 5. The Sanctuary of Shadows. The silver snapped like it was made of glass. The heavy weight fell off Seraphina's neck. Gasps. She took a breath. It felt like the first real breath she had taken in years. The magic rushed back. Her wolf, the white spirit, let out a tiny, tired howl in her mind. "We are alive," the wolf whispered. "We are free." Seraphina looked at Valerius. He was shaking his hand. His skin was red and blistered from the silver. He had hurt himself just to get the collar off her. Kaelin would have never done that. Kaelin wouldn't even touch a silver spoon if it was too cold. "Why?" she asked. "The silver. It burns you." Valerius looked at her. His gold eyes tracked the marks on her neck. His expression was hard. "I hate cages, little healer, and I hate the men who build them." He reached down and picked her up. He didn't ask. He just lifted her like she weighed nothing. He walked away from the wagon, into the deep, dark woods. The shadows followed him like loyal dogs. Seraphina should have been terrified. She was being carried into the heart of a rogue kingdom by a man called the Tyrant. But as her head rested against his chest, she heard his heart. It was slow, steady. It beat like a drum. Thump, thump, thump. It felt safe. "Where are we going?" she asked. Her eyes were getting heavy. The stress of the day was finally catching up to her. "Home," he said. The word was short, but it felt big. "To the sanctuary, to the place where the broken things go." "I'm not broken," she muttered, her pride flicking like a candle flame. "No?" Valerius looked down at her. A small, tiny smile touched his scarred lips. It wasn't a mean smile. It was a challenge. "You look pretty shattered to me, Seraphina. But don't worry, I'm very good at putting things back together, just not the way they were before." As the forest swallowed them whole, Seraphina felt the last bit of the silver moon pack fade away. She wasn't a lead healer anymore. She wasn't a mate. She was a rogue. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the dark. Chapter 6. The King and the Spirit. The Sanctuary of Shadows wasn't a castle. It wasn't a village. It was a fortress built into the side of a mountain. It was full of light and noise. As Valerius carried her through the gates, Seraphina saw people. But they weren't normal wolves. She saw a man with one arm. She saw a girl with eyes that were two different colors. She saw an old wolf who walked with a limp. They all looked at Valerius with love, not fear, not duty. Love. They called out to him. They waved. They looked at Seraphina with curiosity, but not hate. "Welcome to the end of the world," Valerius said. He set her down on a soft bed in a room that smelled like pine and expensive ink. The room was beautiful. There were books everywhere. There was a fireplace with a roaring fire. There was a window that looked out at the stars. It was better than any room she had ever had at the Silver Moon Pack. "Sleep," Valerius ordered. He turned to leave. "Wait!" Seraphina called out. She stood up, her legs still a bit shaky. "Kaelin told me he said you wanted a healer for your monsters. He said you were a tyrant." Valerius stopped. He didn't turn around. His back was like a wall of muscle and scars. "Kaelin is a man who thinks power comes from a crown. He thinks perfection is the only thing worth having. He is wrong." He turned his head just enough for her to see his glowing gold eye. "My people are monsters to him because they aren't perfect. They are outcasts because they are different. And yes, I am a tyrant. I am a tyrant to anyone who tries to hurt them." He stepped closer to her. He was so tall she had to tilt her head back. He smelled like the mountain air. "I didn't bring you here to heal them, Seraphina. They heal each other. I brought you here because I saw your wolf. I saw the white spirit crying behind your eyes." Seraphina froze. He knew. "How?" she whispered. "I see things other people don't," he said. He reached out and tucked a lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was surprisingly gentle. "The silver moonpack wanted to bury you. I want to see you burn. Now sleep. Tomorrow we start training." "Training?" she asked. "For what?" Valerius walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the handle. "For the war, little spirit. Because when Kaelin finds out what he threw away, he's going to want it back, and I don't give back what is mine." Click. The door closed. Seraphina sat on the bed. Her neck still felt the ghost of the collar. But her heart was beating for the first time in years. She looked out the window at the dark mountains. She was a gift. She was an outcast. She was a healer. But as she watched the shadows dance on the wall, she realized she was something else, too. She was a weapon, and she was finally in the hands of someone who knew how to use her. Chapter 7. The first morning. Waking up was like being hit by a cold wave. Seraphina bolted upright, her hand flying to her throat. Her fingers brushed bare, warm skin. No silver, no heavy weight, no cage. She let out a long, shaky breath that sounded like a sob. The room was flooded with golden light. It smelled like fresh pine needles and something sweet, like honey cakes baking somewhere nearby. "You're finally awake," a voice chirped. Seraphina jumped. Sitting by the fireplace was a young girl. She couldn't have been more than 18. She had wild, curly red hair and eyes that didn't match. One was bright blue. The other was a deep forest green. She was sewing a leather tunic with quick, steady hands. "I'm Miri," the girl said with a wide, toothy grin. "The king said not to wake you. He said you looked like you'd been through a war, which, yeah, you kinda did." "Where is he?" Seraphina asked. Her voice was raspy. She felt hollow inside. The bond with Kaelin was gone, and it felt like a missing limb. It was a phantom itch that she couldn't scratch. It was a hole that leaked cold air into her soul. "Training," Miri said. She stood up and tossed a pile of clothes onto the bed. "He's always training. He says the world is hungry and we're the meat. You better get dressed. He doesn't like to wait." Walking to the window, Seraphina looked down. The sanctuary was buzzing. Below her, shifters were moving everywhere. They weren't the pretty, perfect wolves of the silver moon. These people were scarred. They were missing ears. They walked with limps. But they were laughing. They were sharing food. They looked alive. Looking at them made her chest ache. She had spent her whole life trying to make people look perfect. She had used her healing to hide scars. But here, the scars were worn like medals. It was a world turned upside down. "He's waiting for you in the pits," Miri said, heading for the door. "And trust me, Seraphina, then you're going to want to eat something first. He's not exactly the gentle type." Chapter 8. The Meat and the Bone. As the sun started to climb higher, Seraphina found herself standing at the edge of a dirt circle. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and dust. In the center of the circle was Valerius. He wasn't wearing a shirt. His back was a map of old pain. white lines and jagged marks that told a story of 1,000 battles. He was fighting 3 large men at once. He moved like lightning. He wasn't just strong. He was smart. He used their own weight against them. Thwack. He sent one man flying into the dirt. Crunch. He swiped the legs out from under another. "Stop watching and get in here," Valerius barked. He didn't even look at her. "I don't fight," Seraphina said, her voice trembling. "I'm a healer. I fix things. I don't break them." Valerius stopped. He turned around, his chest heaving. His gold eyes were glowing with a predatory heat. He walked toward her, and the other men scrambled out of his way. He stopped just inches from her face. He was so big he blocked out the sun. "You fix things for people who don't care if you die," he growled. The sound was low. It was a vibration she felt in her own bones. "Kaelin used your kindness like a shield. He let you be weak so he could feel strong. But here, weakness gets people killed." He shoved a wooden practice sword into her hands. It was heavy. Her wrists hurt just holding it. "Pick it up," he ordered. "I can't," she whispered. "I'm not a warrior." "Then you're a victim," Valerius snapped. He lunged, a blur of muscle and fury. Seraphina didn't think. She moved. She dropped to the dirt, rolling away just as the wooden blade whistled over her head. Her heart was pounding. Her wolf, the white spirit, woke up. It didn't offer her healing magic. It offered her teeth. "Again!" Valerius shouted. By the time the sun was overhead, Seraphina was covered in bruises. Her lungs burned. Her silk dress was ruined. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't thinking about Kaelin. She wasn't thinking about being a gift. She was only thinking about the man in front of her and how much she wanted to hit him back. Chapter 9. The Hunter's Heart. By the time evening arrived, the anger had turned into a slow, simmering heat. Seraphina sat by the stream behind the fortress, washing the dirt from her face. The water was ice cold. It felt good against her bruised skin. "You have good instincts," a voice said from the shadows. She didn't jump this time. She knew that smell. Rain, ozone, power. Valerius stepped out of the trees. He had a clean shirt on, but it was unbuttoned, showing the hard lines of his stomach. He sat down on a rock near her. "You didn't heal yourself," he noticed. "I wanted to remember the lessons," she said quietly. She looked at her reflection in the water. She looked different. Her eyes were brighter. The paleness was replaced by a flush of life. "The Silver Moon Pack is looking for you," Valerius said. His voice was serious now. "Kaelin told the other alphas that I kidnapped you. He's trying to play the hero so he can take you back." "He doesn't want me," Seraphina scoffed. "He rejected me." "He wants the white spirit," Valerius countered. He leaned in close. He smelled so good it made her dizzy. "He knows what you are now. A rare white spirit can heal an entire army. She can win a war just by standing there. You're a prize, Seraphina, and he hates that I have his prize." "Is that all I am to you?" she asked. Her heart was racing. "A prize? A weapon?" Valerius reached out. His large, scarred hand cupped her jaw. His thumb brushed over her bottom lip. It was a soft touch, but it felt like a lightning strike. "You are a storm, Seraphina," he whispered. "And I've always wanted to be right in the middle of the lightning." He didn't kiss her, he just looked at her. He looked at her like he could see every secret she had ever kept. He looked at her like he wanted to devour her and protect her at the same time. The tension was so thick it felt like it would snap. "Run with me," he said suddenly. "What?" "Shift. No silver, no cages, just the woods and the moon. Let the white spirit out, Seraphina. Let me see who you really are." Chapter 10. The Midnight Run. Walking through the dark forest, Seraphina felt a strange sense of peace. The moon was a giant silver coin in the sky. The trees whispered to each other in the wind. Valerius walked beside her, his movements silent and graceful. "Ready?" he asked. Seraphina nodded. She closed her eyes. She stopped fighting the light. She stopped trying to be small. She reached deep inside, past the pain and the rejection. She found the core of her soul. It was bright. It was pure. It was white. The transformation was intense. It didn't feel like breaking bones. It felt like being reborn. Her skin hummed. Her muscles stretched. A brilliant, glowing white light erupted from her body, lighting up the forest like it was daytime. When she opened her eyes, she was on 4 paws. She was huge. Her fur was the color of falling snow, and it shimmered with a soft, magical light. She felt powerful. She felt fast. Beside her, a massive black wolf appeared. He was twice her size. His fur was like the midnight sky, and his eyes were glowing gold. Valerius. He let out a low, vibrating purr. He nudged her shoulder with his head. "Run!" His voice echoed in her mind. They took off. It was a blur of speed and sensation. The wind whipped through her white fur. The ground was soft under her paws. She felt the heartbeat of the forest. She felt the life in the trees. She wasn't just a healer. She was the spirit of the woods herself. Valerius stayed right beside her. They moved like they were 2 parts of the same machine. They jumped over fallen logs. They splashed through shallow creeks. The chemistry was visceral, a pull of gravity that she couldn't escape. But then the air changed. The sweet smell of the forest was replaced by something sharp, something chemical. Seraphina skidded to a stop, her hackles rising. Valerius stopped too, a low growl ripping through his chest. In the clearing ahead there was a dead deer, but it wasn't killed by a predator. It was covered in a strange silver foam, and pinned to a tree nearby was a flag, the silver moon pack. "They're already here," Valerius growled in her mind. Just when she thought she was safe in the arms of a monster, the cage was reaching out to drag her back into the dark. Chapter 11. The Bitter Scent. The silver foam hissed on the deer's fur like 1,000 tiny snakes. Seraphina stood in her white wolf form, her heart hammering against her ribs. The smell was sharp, like burnt metal and sour vinegar. It made her nose burn. It made her wolf want to tuck its tail and run. She had spent years around medicines, but she had never seen anything this cruel. Valerius stepped forward, his massive black paws treading softly on the dead leaves. He lowered his head, his golden eyes narrowing. A low, vibrating growl started deep in his chest. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. He nudged the foam with a claw, and the silver bubbles popped, releasing a small puff of gray smoke. "Spirit binders," Valerius's voice echoed in her mind. It was cold. It was hard. It was the voice of a king who knew his enemy's darkest tricks. They didn't kill this deer for food. They killed it to test the poison. They are looking for a way to stop your light, Seraphina. Following the discovery of the deer, the woods felt different. The shadows seemed longer. The wind felt like a warning. Seraphina shifted back to her human form, shivering as the cold mountain air hit her skin. She reached out and touched the tree where the silver moon flag hung. The fabric was expensive silk, the same silk Kalen used for his fancy banners. It felt like a slap in the face. "He's not just coming for me," Seraphina whispered. Her voice was small, but it cut through the silence of the woods. "He's coming to erase me. He wants to bottle me up and use me until there is nothing left." Valerius shifted back too, standing tall and imposing in the moonlight. He took off his leather jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm. It smelled like him, like the storm and the earth. He looked at the flag, his jaw tight. He reached out, grabbed the silk, and ripped it down with one powerful jerk. "Let him come," Valerius said. He crushed the flag in his fist. He thinks he's hunting a rabbit. He doesn't realize he's walking into a den of wolves who have nothing left to lose. As they turned to head back to the sanctuary, the forest went silent. But the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like a predator holding its breath before the final strike. Chapter 12. The Hall of the Forgotten Back. Within the walls of the sanctuary, the mood had shifted from celebration to a quiet, grim focus. Word had spread about the Silver Moon Scouts. The broken wolves weren't hiding, though. They were sharpening blades. They were checking the walls. They were readying themselves for a fight they had been expecting their whole lives. Seraphina spent the morning in the infirmary, but this wasn't like her old infirmary. There were no white sheets or fancy potions. This was a room built for survival. She moved between the cots, her hands glowing with a soft, milky light. She was no longer the girl who hid. She was no longer the girl who cried. She was no longer the girl who served a master who hated her. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice gentle as she touched the scarred leg of an old warrior named Silas. "Only when I think about the man who gave it to me," Silas grunted. He had a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much. "But the king says a scar is just a map of where you've been. It doesn't tell you where you're going." Across the hall, Seraphina saw Miri helping a young boy who was struggling to breathe. The boy was a runt, small and thin. In the Silver Moon Pack, he would have been left in the woods to die. Here, he was being fed the best meat. He was being told he was a warrior. Seraphina felt a lump in her throat. She realized that these people weren't monsters. They were just survivors. "They aren't just outcasts, are they?" Seraphina asked Valerius later that afternoon. They were standing on the balcony, watching the sun set over the jagged peaks. "They are the people the perfect packs didn't want," Valerius replied. He leaned his elbows on the stone railing. "The weak, the different, the ones with too much heart and not enough cruelty. They are my family, Seraphina. And now, they are yours too." By the time the moon rose, Seraphina felt a new weight on her shoulders. It wasn't the heavy pull of a silver collar. It was the weight of a queen's responsibility. She looked at her glowing hands and realized her power wasn't a curse. It was a promise to the people who had finally given her a home. Chapter 13. Blood in the Snow. The peace didn't last through the night. A horn blasted from the north watchtower, a long, low note that meant intruders. Seraphina was out of her bed before the second blast finished. She didn't grab a bandage. She grabbed the short sword Valerius had given her. Her heart was a drum, beating a rhythm of war. She ran toward the gate, her white fur shimmering as she shifted in mid-air. The snow was falling fast, turning the world into a blur of white and gray. She saw them then, a group of 10 scouts. They wore the silver armor of the Silver Moon. They were fast. They were mean. And they were holding glass jars filled with that horrible silver foam. "Protect the flank!" Valerius's roar echoed through the pass. He was a black shadow in the blizzard, a force of nature that tore through the scouts like they were made of paper. But the scouts weren't after him. They were looking for her. One of them, a man Seraphina recognized from her old pack, pointed a shaking finger at her. "There she is! The spirit! Capture her, dead or alive!" Seraphina didn't hide. She lunged. She was a blur of white light and sharp teeth. She slammed into the scout, her weight pinning him to the frozen ground. He tried to throw a jar of foam at her face, but she was faster. She bit down on his wrist and he screamed as the glass shattered on the snow, harmlessly hissing away from her. Inside the main hall, the women and children were huddled, but the fight outside was visceral. Seraphina felt the heat of the battle. She felt the sting of a blade across her shoulder. She felt the cold blood on her fur. She was no longer a healer who stayed behind. She was a shield. She was a weapon. She was a protector. "They're retreating," Miri yelled from the wall, her bow twanging as she sent an arrow into the leg of a fleeing scout. The forest swallowed the survivors, but the victory felt hollow. Seraphina stood in the middle of the clearing, her white fur stained with red. She looked at the dead scouts and felt a cold realization. This wasn't just a skirmish. This was an invitation. Chapter 14. The Traitor's Tongue. The morning after the attack was quiet. Too quiet. Valerius had his men searching the perimeter, but he was worried. Someone had told Kaelin exactly where the sanctuary's weak points were. Someone had leaked the secret of the White Spirit, and that someone was inside the walls. Find him, Valerius growled to his beta. I want the rat found before the sun goes down. Seraphina sat in the council room, her shoulder bandaged. She wasn't thinking about her wound. She was thinking about the scout she had pinned down. The look in his eyes wasn't just fear, it was greed. They didn't see her as a person. They saw her as a gold mine, a magical battery to power their kingdom. Around the table, the leaders of the rogues sat with grim faces. They fought for their lives, they fought for their home, they fought for each other. But they knew they couldn't win a full-scale war against the Silver Moon and its allies. Not without a plan. The secret is out, Valerius said, his voice echoing in the stone room. Kaelin has put a bounty on the White Spirit. 5,000 gold for her head, 10,000 for her alive. Every poacher and rogue hunter in the territory will be at our gates by the week's end. Let them come, Miri snapped, her mismatched eyes flashing. We've survived worse than a bunch of pretty boy soldiers. It's not just the soldiers, Seraphina interrupted. All eyes turned to her. She stood up, her voice steady. It's the ritual. Kaelin knows I can heal an entire pack at once. He wants that power for the Great War in the south. He will burn this mountain to the ground to get it. By the time the council ended, a plan was formed, but it was a dangerous one. They would have to lure Kaelin into the mountain passes where his numbers didn't matter. But to do that, they needed bait. They needed the White Spirit to show herself. Chapter 15. The Predator's Promise. The night was freezing, but Seraphina didn't feel the cold. She was standing on the highest peak, looking out at the distant lights of the Silver Moon territory. Behind her, she heard the heavy, rhythmic footsteps of Valerius. He stopped beside her, his presence like a warm blanket. You don't have to do this, he said. His voice was soft for once. You could leave. My men would escort you to the coast. You could find a boat. You could be gone before they even realize you're missing. And what happens to the sanctuary? Seraphina asked. She turned to look at him. His gold eyes were full of a strange, aching sadness. What happens to Miri? To Silas? To you? Valerius didn't answer. He just looked out at the horizon. We would survive. We always do. We're the broken thing, Seraphina. We're used to the dark. I don't want to just survive, she said, stepping closer to him. She reached out and took his hand. His skin was rough and scarred, but it felt like home. I spent my whole life being useful to people who didn't love me. For the first time, I want to be useful to people who do. Valerius turned to her, his grip on her hand tightening. He pulled her flush against his chest. The chemistry between them was a physical force, a spark of lightning in the dark. He lowered his head, his nose brushing against hers. He smelled like wood smoke and ancient magic. I will protect you, he whispered, his voice a low, rumbling promise. I will tear the world apart before I let them put that collar on you again. Do you understand me, Seraphina? I'm not afraid of the collar anymore, she said, her breath hitching as he leaned in. Because I'm not the girl who wore it. He kissed her then. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a hungry, desperate thing, a collision of two stars. It was a kiss that tasted of war and hope and 1,000 unspoken words. It was the moment she knew there was no going back. She wasn't just a guest in the sanctuary anymore. She was its heart. As the wind howled around them, a single howl echoed from the valley below. It was the Silver Moon Pack. They were here, and they were bringing the fire. Chapter 16. The Predator's Lesson. Since the kiss on the mountain peak, the air between Seraphina and Valerius had changed. It wasn't just a spark anymore, it was a wildfire. Every time their eyes met, the world seemed to grow quiet, leaving only the sound of their shared breathing. But there was no time for soft words. The Silver Moon Pack was at the base of the mountain, and the sanctuary had to become a cage for the hunters. Again! Valerius roared. Seraphina wiped blood from her lip. She was standing in the center of the training pit, her chest heaving. Her muscles felt like they were made of hot lead. Valerius wasn't holding back today. He moved like a shadow, fast, heavy, and unforgiving. He wasn't treating her like a fragile healer. He was treating her like a soldier. "I'm tired, Valerius," she panted, her voice cracking. "I've been at this for 6 hours. "The enemy doesn't care if you're tired." Valerius lunged. He caught her around the waist and slammed her into the dirt. The impact knocked the wind out of her. "The men coming for you won't wait for you to catch your breath. They will take your light and then they will take your life." Seraphina looked up at him. His gold eyes were cold, but beneath the surface, she saw a flicker of agony. He hated doing this. He hated hurting her. But he knew that a bruise today was better than a grave tomorrow. "Fight back," her wolf whispered. "Don't be the medicine. Be the poison." With a sudden burst of speed, Seraphina didn't reach for her sword. She reached for him. She grabbed his arm, used his own momentum, and flipped him. It was a move he had taught her, but she executed it with a grace that only a spirit could possess. Valerius hit the ground with a heavy thud. For a second, the entire training yard went silent. "Better," Valerius murmured, looking up at her from the dirt. A slow, dark smile spread across his face. "Much better." Chapter 17. The Secret Unveiled. Following the training session, a new shadow fell over the sanctuary. A messenger arrived at the gates. He wasn't a wolf. He was a human, a scrawny man with twitchy eyes who smelled like cheap tobacco and fear. He carried a parchment sealed with the crest of the International Hunters Guild. Valerius read the letter in the great hall, his face turning a terrifying shade of gray. Seraphina stood beside him, her hand resting on the hilt of her dagger. She could feel the tension in the room, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. "What does it say?" she asked. "The leak was deeper than we thought," Valerius said, his voice a low rumble of thunder. "Kalen didn't just tell his allies. He sold the information to the guild. They've published your description, Seraphina. They're calling you the White Miracle. Every poacher from here to the coast is heading for these mountains." The midpoint shift hit Seraphina like a physical blow. This wasn't just a pack war anymore. This was a global hunt. She wasn't just a rejected mate. She was the most valuable prize in the world. The stakes had officially skyrocketed. If the sanctuary stayed here, they would be surrounded by thousands of hunters armed with silver and fire. "They think I'm a miracle?" Seraphina whispered, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "I'll show them a miracle. I'll show them what happens when you try to harvest a spirit." "We can't stay on the defensive," Miri said, slamming her fist onto the table. "We need to hit them before they gather. We need to show them that the sanctuary isn't a target. It's a trap." Chapter 18. The Midnight Blur. As the pressure mounted, Valerius took Seraphina into the deep woods for one final run. The air was freezing, but their bodies were radiating heat. This wasn't about training. This was about connection. They needed to be perfectly in sync for the battle to come. "Shift with me," Valerius commanded. Seraphina didn't hesitate. She let the light take her. The transformation was visceral, a rush of power that turned her skin to silk and her teeth to ivory. Her white fur glowed with an ethereal light, casting long shadows against the snow. Beside her, the massive black wolf stood, his golden eyes locked on hers. They ran. They were a blur of black and white against the gray forest. They moved like a single heartbeat. When she jumped, he was there to catch her. When he lunged, she covered his flank. The chemistry between them wasn't just romantic, it was primal. It was the predator and prey dynamic turned into a dance of equals. She wasn't running from him anymore. She was running with him. They stopped at the edge of a frozen waterfall. The ice looked like diamonds in the moonlight. Valerius nudged her neck with his large head, a low purr vibrating through her fur. "You are ready," his voice echoed in her mind. "You are the moon, and I am the night. Together, we will drown them in the dark." Seraphina licked his muzzle. her heart full of a fierce, terrifying love. She had been so afraid of being different, but in his eyes, her difference was her crown. She was finally home, even if that home was about to be burned to the ground. Chapter 19. The siege begins. But the peace of the woods was shattered by the sound of an explosion. A plume of orange fire rose from the direction of the sanctuary. Seraphina's heart stopped. The children. The infirmary. "Go!" Valerius roared in her mind. They raced back, their paws tearing up the frozen earth. When they reached the gates, the scene was a nightmare. The Silver Moon Pack hadn't waited for the guild. Kaelin had arrived early, using spirit-binding grenades that released a thick, choking silver fog. The rogues were screaming. The silver fog was like acid to their lungs. Seraphina saw Silas on the ground, his leg bleeding, trying to crawl away from a Silver Moon soldier. "Get away from him!" Seraphina screamed, shifting back to human form as she leaped from a high ledge. She landed between Silas and the soldier. She didn't use a sword, she used her light. She let the white spirit's energy explode outward, a blinding flash of pure, holy fire. The soldier screamed, his eyes burning as the light scorched his retinas. He dropped his weapon and fled into the fog. "Seraphina!" Kaelin's voice cut through the chaos. She looked up. He was standing on the bridge, looking down at her. He looked perfect in his silver armor, his golden hair shining. But to Seraphina, he looked like a monster. He looked like the man who had put a noose around her neck and called it a gift. Chapter 20. The Cost of Purity. "Come home, Seraphina!" Kaelin shouted over the sounds of the battle. "Look at what you're doing to these people. They're dying because of you. If you come with me now, I'll stop the attack. I'll spare the runts and the freaks." Seraphina looked around. Miri was fighting 3 men at once. Valerius was buried under a pile of soldiers, his black fur matted with blood. The sanctuary was burning. The internal flaw, her belief that she had to sacrifice herself to fix things, reared its head. Is he right? She wondered. Am I the reason they're suffering? If I go back to the cage, will they be safe? "Don't listen to him!" Valerius's voice was a ragged snarl. He threw a soldier off his back and stood tall, his eyes fixed on her. "A cage isn't safety, Seraphina. It's just a slower way to die," Kaelin sneered. He pulled a small glass vial from his belt. It was filled with a swirling dark liquid. "This is the blight, Seraphina, designed specifically for a white spirit. If I drop this, your magic will turn into a plague. You'll kill everyone you're trying to heal." The stakes were now absolute. Kaelin wasn't just trying to capture her, he was willing to corrupt her very soul to prove his point. He was the personification of traditional purity, using the most impure weapons imaginable. Chapter 21. The Breaking Point. Seraphina stood in the center of the bridge, the wind whipping her white hair around her face. She looked at Kaelin and then she looked at Valerius. She saw the monster who had given her a sword and the prince who had given her a collar. "I'm not going back, Kaelin," she said. Her voice was calm. It was the calm before a hurricane. "Then you've chosen their graves," Kaelin roared. He raised the vial, ready to shatter it on the stone. "No," Seraphina whispered. "I've chosen my own throne." She lunged, but she didn't lunge at Kaelin. She lunged at the vial. In a split second of ancestral fortitude, she caught the glass in mid-air. The impact shattered it against her palm. The dark liquid, the blight, soaked into her skin. A scream of agony ripped from her throat as the corruption hit her veins. It felt like liquid fire. It felt like her wolf was being torn apart. She fell to her knees, her white light flickering and turning a sickly, bruised purple. "Seraphina!" Valerius screamed, his voice full of a pain she had never heard before. Kaelin laughed. "If I can't have the spirit, I'll have the weapon she becomes. Secure her." As the darkness closed in on Seraphina's vision, she realized her mistake. She had tried to sacrifice herself again. She had tried to be the martyr. And now, she was the very thing she feared most. A monster under Kaelin's control. Chapter 22. The poisoned light. After the darkness fell, the world turned into a nightmare of purple and gray. Seraphina lay on the cold stone of the bridge, her body jerking as the blight raced through her veins. It felt like someone was pouring molten lead into her blood. Every time her heart beat, the purple veins on her arms pulsed with a sickly light. She tried to reach for her wolf, but the white spirit was screaming, a high, thin sound that echoed in the back of her mind like a dying bird. "Look at her," Kalen sneered, his boots clicking on the stone as he walked toward her. He didn't look like a hero anymore. He looked like a scavenger. The great white spirit, reduced to a heap of rotting magic. You see, Seraphina? This is what happens when you run with monsters. You become one. Because of the pain, Seraphina couldn't even speak. She looked up at him through a haze of tears. She saw the vile shadow still on his face. She saw the greed in his eyes. He didn't want to save her. He wanted to own the rot. He wanted to weaponize her agony. While the battle raged around them, Kalen reached down and grabbed her hair, pulling her head back. "Take her to the transport," he barked at his guards, "and keep her collared. If she tries to heal herself, the blight will finish the job." Seraphina felt her body being dragged across the bridge. Her vision flickered. She saw Valerius through the smoke, a massive black beast fighting off 5 soldiers at once. He was covered in blood. He was roaring her name. But for the first time, she saw fear in his golden eyes. It wasn't fear for himself. It was fear that the light was finally going out. Chapter 23. The King's Wrath. Inside the heart of the mountain, Valerius felt the bond, the strange new tether to Seraphina, snap and twist. It wasn't the clean break of a rejection. It was a slow, agonizing rot. He stood in the middle of the great hall, his chest heaving. His men were wounded. The sanctuary was burning. His family was bleeding. "She's gone," Miri whispered, her mismatched eyes full of tears. She was holding her side, blood staining her red hair. "The silver moon. They took her, Valerius. They took our spirit." Since the beginning of his reign, Valerius had been a man of rules. He protected his own. He stayed in the shadows. But as he looked at the empty spot where Seraphina had stood, the rules shattered. He didn't care about the treaty. He didn't care about the laws of the alphas. He felt a rage so cold it turned his blood to ice. Despite the fire and the smoke, he stood tall. He looked at Silas, the old warrior. He looked at the runts and the outcasts. "They think we are broken," Valerius growled. His voice was a low, rumbling growl that made the stones vibrate. "They think we are trash to be tossed away, but they forgot one thing." He stepped toward the center of the hall, his shadow stretching long and sharp against the wall. "A broken blade is still a blade. A wounded wolf is still a hunter, and a monster never stops until he finds what belongs to him." "We aren't hiding anymore," he declared, his voice rising like a storm. "Tonight, the sanctuary goes to war. We don't fight for a crown. We don't fight for a border. We fight for the woman who taught us how to hope." Chapter 24. The Ghost of the Healer. Down in the valley, in a tent made of silk and silver thread, Seraphina was dying. She was strapped to a table, the silver collar back around her neck. But this time, it didn't just block her wolf. It acted as an anchor for the blight. Every time she tried to breathe, the purple smoke rose from her skin. Kalen stood over her, a glass syringe in his hand. "The healers say your blood is changing, Seraphina. It's becoming concentrated, deadly. Imagine what a single drop could do to an enemy's water supply. You're going to make me the most powerful alpha in the world." "You are a coward," she choked out. The words felt like sandpaper. Kalen laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "I am a winner, and winners don't care about how they get the prize." He leaned in, his face inches from hers. He smelled like expensive cologne and rot. "Do you remember the little girl who used to follow me around? The one who thought I was her soulmate? She's dead, Seraphina, and soon the healer will be too. Only the weapon will remain. While he spoke, a shadow moved against the silk of the tent. It was silent. It was heavy. It was the smell of rain and ozone. Seraphina's heart gave a weak, fluttering jump. He's here. She didn't know how, but she knew that scent. It was the scent of the man who chose the monster so she didn't have to. Chapter 25. The Heart of the Monster. Suddenly, the world exploded. The silk tent was ripped open by a claw the size of a dinner plate. A massive black wolf lunged through the gap, a snarl of pure fury ripping through the air. Kaelin screamed, diving out of the way as Valerius landed on the table. He didn't shift back. He didn't waste time. He looked at Seraphina with those glowing gold eyes. He saw the purple veins. He saw the silver collar. Whir. His teeth caught the lock of the collar and snapped it with a single, violent shake of his head. Valerius. No, Seraphina whispered. The blight. It will touch you. Valerius didn't care. He shifted back to his human form right there in the middle of the enemy camp. He was naked, scarred, and covered in the blood of the guards he had killed to get here. He reached down and scooped her up into his arms. The purple rot touched his skin, sizzling and burning his chest, but he didn't even flinch. I told you, he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. I don't give back what is mine. Kill them! Kaelin's voice roared from outside. Kill the rogue king! Burn them both! Valerius looked down at Seraphina. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a man who had finally found the only thing that mattered. Can you run, Seraphina? One last time? Chapter 26. The Point of No Return. Because of the blight, her body was weak. But because of his touch, her soul was on fire. Seraphina reached up and touched his face. Her fingers were stained purple, but the light of the white spirit was fighting back. It wasn't a soft, healing light anymore. It was a jagged, white flame. I won't run anymore, Valerius, she said. Her voice was steady now. I'm done running. They stood together in the center of the camp, surrounded by 100 Silver Moon soldiers. Kaelin stood at the front, his sword drawn. The air was thick with the smell of death and anticipation. This was the point of no return. There was no going back to the sanctuary as outcasts. There was no going back to the Silver Moon as a healer. The world was about to change. You think you can take her from me? Kaelin laughed, though his hand was shaking. You're 2 people against an army. He isn't alone, a voice shouted from the tree line. Suddenly, the woods erupted. Miri, Silas, and the entire found family of the sanctuary crashed through the brush. They weren't the broken ones anymore. They were a unified force of fury. They didn't have silver armor. They had scars. They had heart. And they had a queen to protect. For the spirit! Miri screamed, her arrow flying straight and true. The battle wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sovereignty. As Seraphina felt the white spirit roar inside her, she didn't reach for a bandage. She reached for the light. She reached for the fire. And as she looked at Valerius, she realized that the monster had never been him. It had always been the man who tried to put her in a cage. The war had truly begun. Chapter 27. The Tainted Escape. Following the explosion of the rescue, the night turned into a blur of blood and purple fire. Valerius held Seraphina tight against his chest as he ran through the Silver Moon camp. His paws, now human feet, hit the frozen ground with a heavy thud-thud-thud. Behind them, the rogues fought like demons. Miri's arrows hissed through the air. Silas's roar echoed off the trees. But the Silver Moon soldiers were everywhere. They weren't just fighting with swords anymore, they were throwing glass jars that burst into silver smoke. Don't let her go! Kaelin screamed from the chaos. The spirit belongs to the crown! Seraphina felt the purple rot in her veins pulsing. It felt like needles of ice. Every time she breathed, she saw flashes of gray. She was a healer. but she couldn't heal herself. The blight was eating her light. It was a hungry monster that wanted her soul. "Hold on, Seraphina," Valerius gasped. His skin was blistering where the purple smoke touched him. "Just a little further. The mountain will protect us." I'm too heavy," she whispered. Her head rolled against his shoulder. "Leave me, Valerius. I'm poisonous now." "Never," he growled. It was a short, sharp word. It was a promise. Because the woods were thick with smoke, they almost didn't see the trap. A group of Silver Moon elite guards stepped out from the shadows. They weren't carrying normal steel. They carried long, thin blades that glowed with a sickly, pale blue light. Cursed blades. Chapter 28. The Shadows Strike. While the stars disappeared behind the clouds, the leader of the guards stepped forward. It was Kalen's beta. He had a cruel smile and eyes that looked like dead stones. He raised his blue sword. The air around the blade seemed to freeze. It was a spirit-binding weapon, made to kill things that couldn't be killed. "The Alpha wants her back," the beta said. But he didn't say she had to be in one piece. He lunged. The blue blade moved like lightning. Seraphina tried to move, she tried to shift, but the blight kept her pinned in her own skin. She was a bird with broken wings. She closed her eyes, waiting for the cold bite of the steel. Clang. The sound was like a hammer hitting a bell. Seraphina opened her eyes. She wasn't hit. Valerius had twisted his body at the last second. He had stepped in front of the blade. The blue steel didn't hit her heart. It sank deep into his side. "No!" Seraphina screamed. The sound was a jagged rip in the night. Valerius didn't scream. He didn't even groan. He just grabbed the guard's throat with one hand and crushed. The beta fell like a sack of rocks. But the damage was done. The blue light from the sword was spreading into Valerius's skin. It was fighting the gold light of his eyes. Despite the fire in her heart, Seraphina felt a cold dread wash over her. Valerius stumbled. He fell to one knee. He was still holding her, but his grip was getting weak. His breathing was a wet, rattling sound. "Valerius, look at me," she cried. She put her hands over the wound. Purple rot met blue curse. The magic hissed and smoked between them. "Keep going," Valerius whispered. His gold eyes flickered. Then they went dark. He slumped forward, his heavy body pinning her to the cold, bloody snow. Chapter 29. The Dying Fire. After the heavy doors of the sanctuary finally slammed shut, the silence felt like a grave. The rogues had made it back, but they were a broken army. Miri was limping, Silas was covered in burns, and Valerius was carried in on a stretcher made of old cloaks. The great hall was no longer a place of warmth and honey cakes. It was a ruin. One of the towers had collapsed during the siege. The air smelled like smoke and wet ash. The found family stood around the stretcher, their faces pale in the flickering torchlight. "He's not breathing right," Miri whispered. She reached out to touch his hand, but she flinched away. His skin was freezing. It was the cold of the grave. "The blue blade," Silas said, his voice cracking. "It's a spirit sleep curse. It freezes the soul. No medicine can touch it, no bandage can stop it." Seraphina stood over him. She looked at her own hands. They were stained purple by the blight. She looked at the man she loved. He was dying because of her. He had taken a hit meant for a gift. He had protected a healer who couldn't even save him. The internal flaw came back with a vengeance. "I am a curse," she thought. "Everything I touch breaks." Kalen was right. I am a monster. I bring death to the people who try to love me. She tried to use her light. She closed her eyes and reached for the white spirit. "Help him, please." But the spirit was silent. It was buried under the purple rot. She felt hollow. She felt useless. She felt like a child lost in a storm. Chapter 30. The dark night hours passed. The fire in the hearth went out, but nobody moved to fix it. The sanctuary felt like it was holding its breath. Outside, the howling of the silver moon pack was getting closer. They were surrounding the mountain. They were waiting for the broken things to give up. Seraphina sat on the floor next to Valerius's bed. She held his cold hand. She didn't cry. She was past crying. She was in the dark night of the soul. She looked at the scars on his chest. She thought about the way he had looked at her during their midnight run. She thought about the way he had said, "I don't give back what is mine." "You were wrong, Valerius," she whispered into the dark. "You shouldn't have kept me. I'm the thing that's killing you." The stakes were gone. If he died, the sanctuary would fall. If the sanctuary fell, the white spirit would be captured and turned into a weapon. Hope wasn't just low. It was gone. Suddenly, the doors to the room creaked open. Miri walked in. She looked small. She looked tired. "Seraphina, Silas says the silver moon is at the gates. They have the blight cannons ready. Kalen says he'll give us 1 hour. After that, he burns the mountain." "Tell them to wait," Seraphina said. Her voice was flat. "What are you going to do?" Miri asked, hope flickering in her mismatched eyes. "I'm going to do what I should have done at the start," Seraphina said. She stood up. Her legs were shaky, but her mind was clear. "I'm going to stop being the healer, and I'm going to start being the sacrifice." Chapter 31. Broken Mirrors. Before she could leave the room, Seraphina stopped in front of a mirror. It was an old, cracked piece of glass. She looked at herself. She saw the purple veins on her neck. She saw the blood on her white dress. She looked like a nightmare. She looked like the monster the world told her she was. She reached out and touched the glass. Is this it? She wondered. Is this the end of the rare white spirit? A tainted thing in a burning mountain? She looked at Valerius one last time. He looked so still. He looked like a statue of a fallen king. The blue curse was creeping up his neck, turning his skin the color of a winter sky. No light, no hope, no way out. The words echoed in her mind. She felt the heavy weight of the world on her shoulders. She had failed her pack. She had failed her family. And now, she was failing her heart. She walked toward the door, her head down. She was ready to give herself up. She was ready to go back to the cage if it meant Kalen would stop the fire. She was ready to be the gift one last time. But then she heard it. A tiny, faint sound. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a whisper. It was a pulse. Thump, thump. It wasn't coming from Valerius. It was coming from her own chest. But it wasn't her heart. It was the spirit. It wasn't dead. It was just waiting. It was waiting for her to stop trying to be good. It was waiting for her to stop trying to be pure. Seraphina stopped at the door. She looked back at the mirror. She didn't see a victim anymore. She saw a fire that hadn't been lit yet. "The light doesn't hide," she whispered. Her voice was growing stronger. "The light burns." Outside, the first cannon blast shook the mountain. The descent was over. The only thing left was the fall. Or the flight. Chapter 32. The Forbidden Spark. "If I have to burn the whole world to save him, then let it turn to ash." Seraphina's voice didn't shake. It was hard. It was cold. It was the sound of a woman who had run out of fear. She stood over Valerius, her hands hovering above his frozen chest. The purple veins of the blight were glowing on her skin. They looked like tiny, angry rivers of lightning. She could feel the curse from the blue blade fighting her. It was a war of colors, purple rot against blue death. In spite of the darkness in the room, a new light began to flicker in Seraphina's eyes. It wasn't the soft, milky white of a healer. It was a sharp, jagged silver. She reached into the deepest part of her soul. She didn't look for the pure girl Kalen wanted. She looked for the wild, untamed spirit that Valerius had seen. "Miri, get me the ancient sands and the black salt," Seraphina barked. Those are for the forbidden rituals, Miri whispered, her mismatched eyes wide. The elders say those rituals take a piece of your soul, Seraphina. They say you can never go back to being a healer once you use them. I am done being a healer, Seraphina said. She grabbed a bowl of black salt and began drawing a circle around Valerius's bed. I am going to be the storm that breaks the silver moon. Because of the choice she was making, the air in the room began to hum. It felt like the moments before a massive lightning strike. Seraphina realized she didn't need to fix the blight. She needed to use it. She was going to mix her spirit light with the poison in her blood. She was going to create something the world had never seen. As the circle closed, the purple veins on her arms grew brighter and the floor began to shake with the weight of her power. Chapter 33. The Queen's Rally. Moving toward the center of the Great Hall, Seraphina looked like a ghost of war. Her white dress was torn, her hair was a mess of tangles. But as she stood on the raised platform, every rogue in the room stopped moving. They didn't see a gift or a victim. They saw a leader who was ready to die for them. "They are at the gates," Seraphina shouted. Her voice echoed off the high stone walls. "They have their silver cannons. They have their fancy armor. They think they are coming here to take a prize and burn a pile of trash." She looked at Silas, who was leaning on his spear. She looked at the runts who were holding daggers with shaking hands. "Kalen thinks we are broken. He thinks because we have scars, we are weak. He thinks because we are different, we don't deserve a home." "He is wrong," a young boy yelled from the back. "He is dead wrong," Seraphina roared back. "We are the mountain. We are the teeth in the dark. And tonight the broken things are going to show the silver moon how it feels to be shattered." As the shadows stretched across the floor, the rogues began to bang their weapons against the stone. Clang, clang, clang. It was a rhythm of defiance. Seraphina felt their energy flowing into her. She wasn't just one wolf anymore. She was the heart of the entire sanctuary. She was their healer. She was their weapon. She was their queen. Following the roar of the crowd, Seraphina turned to Silas and began to lay out the final plan, a plan that would use the mountain itself to swallow Kalen's army whole. Chapter 34. The Trap of Light. "We won't meet them on the field," Seraphina explained, pointing to a map of the mountain passes. "Kalen has too many soldiers. He has the numbers, but he doesn't have the mountain." She traced a line through the narrowest pass, the one that led straight to the sanctuary's front gate. "We will lure them into the throat. It's narrow. It's steep. They will have to march in a single line. Their cannons will be useless there." "And then what?" Miri asked, checking her bowstring. "And then I will give them the miracle they've been looking for," Seraphina said with a dark smile. "I will stand at the end of the pass. I will show them the white spirit. They will be so blinded by greed that they won't look at the cliffs above them." Because the wind was howling outside, the plan felt like a gamble with the gods. But it was the only way. Silas and the heavy hitters would be on the ridges with boulders and fire. Miri and the archers would be hidden in the caves. They would let the silver moon pack get deep into the throat, and then they would close the trap. "What about the king?" Silas asked softly. "He's still frozen." "The ritual is working," Seraphina said, though her heart felt like it was being squeezed by a cold hand. "But he needs time. He needs the curse to be pulled out of him. I'm going to use the battle to power the ritual. Every drop of energy I use to fight, I'm going to send half of it back to him." "It could kill you," Silas warned. "Tying your life to his while you're fighting an army. It's suicide." "It's not suicide," Seraphina whispered, looking toward the room where Valerius lay. "It's a coronation." Chapter 35. The Cost of the Crown. As the ritual reached its peak, the physical toll began to show on Seraphina's body. She stood in the center of the sanctuary's courtyard, her feet bare on the frozen stone. She was holding 2 large crystals that were glowing with a terrifying purple-white light. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. and her eyes were nothing but silver fire. "It hurts, doesn't it?" Miri whispered, standing nearby with a bucket of water. "It feels like being burned from the inside out," Seraphina admitted. Her voice was a low, breathy rasp. "But the blight is finally listening. It's not a poison anymore, Miri. It's a bridge." She could feel Valerius's soul on the other end of that bridge. He was lost in a forest of blue ice. He was cold. He was fading. But every time her heart beat, she sent a wave of heat across the bridge. She sent him the smell of the rain. She sent him the sound of her voice. She sent him the memory of their midnight run. "Wake up, monster," she thought, her internal monologue a fierce, desperate prayer. "Wake up and see what I've become. Wake up because I can't reign over this mountain without you." Moving with a strange, slow grace, she began to chant in the ancient language of the spirits. The words were heavy. They tasted like copper and old magic. The air around her began to swirl, picking up snow and ash until she was standing in the eye of a small hurricane. The sacrifice was clear. To pull the curse out of Valerius, she had to take it into herself. She was absorbing the blue death while pushing out the white life. She was becoming a vessel of pure, chaotic energy. When the ritual finally settled, she didn't look like a woman anymore. She looked like an avatar of the moon itself. Chapter 36. The March to the Throat. The first cannon blast hit the main gates of the sanctuary. Boom. The stone groaned. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Outside, the howling of the silver moon pack grew into a deafening roar. They were moving into the pass. They were coming for their prize. Moving toward the battle, Seraphina led her rogues through the secret tunnels. She didn't feel the cold. She didn't feel the fear. She only felt the connection to Valerius, a tiny spark of warmth in the back of her mind that told her he was still fighting. "Positions!" Silas hissed as they reached the ridges of the throat. Seraphina walked out onto the ledge at the very end of the pass. Below her, the Silver Moon army looked like a river of steel. At the front was Kalin, his gold armor gleaming even in the gray morning light. He looked up and saw her. He raised his sword and the army came to a halt. "Seraphina!" Kalin's voice echoed up the canyon. "I see you've finally come to your senses. Step down and give yourself up and I will spare this miserable rock." Seraphina didn't answer right away. She looked at him, the man she once thought was her destiny. He looked so small from up here. He looked like a child playing with toys. She felt a wave of pity for the girl she used to be, the girl who would have knelt for him. "Kalin!" she shouted back. Her voice was amplified by the magic, ringing through the throat like a bell. "You wanted the white spirit? You wanted the miracle?" She stepped off the ledge. She didn't fall. She floated down on a cloud of silver and purple light, landing softly in the center of the pass, right in front of the army. She stood alone against 1,000 men. "Here I am," she said, her eyes glowing with a terrifying light. "Come and take me." As the tension reached its breaking point, Kalin's eyes turned yellow with greed. He didn't see the trap. He didn't see the rogues on the cliffs. He only saw the glowing girl in the snow. He pointed his sword at her and gave the order that would start the end of his world. "Charge!" Chapter 37. The Avalanche of Outcasts. As the earth began to shake, the Silver Moon army didn't realize they were running into a grave. 1,000 boots pounded the snow, making a sound like heavy rain on a tin roof. Kalin led the charge, his golden sword raised high, his face twisted with a hungry, greedy smile. He only saw Seraphina standing alone. He didn't see the shadows moving on the cliffs above. "Now!" Seraphina screamed, her voice cutting through the wind like a silver whistle. Following her command, the ridges of the throat exploded. Silas and his warriors didn't use magic. They used the mountain. Massive boulders, some as big as wagons, came crashing down the steep walls. The sound was a terrifying crack-crack-crack as the stone hit the steel-clad soldiers below. The narrow pass turned into a trap of falling rock and screaming men. Archers! Fire! Miri's voice rang out from a hidden cave. Because the path was so narrow, the Silver Moon soldiers had nowhere to hide. Arrows with black feathers rained down like a swarm of angry hornets. The broken warriors of the sanctuary fought with a desperate, wild fury. They didn't have fancy armor. They had the high ground. They had the heart of the hunted. And they had a queen who was finally fighting for herself. In the center of the chaos, Seraphina stood her ground. She didn't flinch as the horses reared and the men fell. She was the anchor. She was the storm. She was the girl who had been rejected, now standing as the wall between her family and the men who wanted to cage them. The battle was visceral, a mix of cold steel, hot blood, and the smell of ozone. Seraphina watched as Kaelin tried to rally his men, but his perfection was useless against the jagged reality of a mountain that wanted him dead. Chapter 38. The Spirit's Wrath. Because she was no longer afraid of the rot, Seraphina let the blight and the light become one. She raised her hands, and the purple-white energy flowed out of her fingers like liquid fire. It wasn't just a shield. It was a wave. It hit the front line of the Silver Moon Guards and sent them flying back into the snow. "You think you can take my soul?" Seraphina whispered, her eyes glowing with a terrifying silver intensity. "Then come and taste it." She lunged forward. She wasn't just a healer anymore. She moved with the apex predator energy she had learned from Valerius. She was a blur of white silk and purple lightning. Every time she struck, the air sizzled. She wasn't killing for sport. She was removing the threat. She was protecting the broken things who had given her a seat at their table. Moving through the crowd of soldiers, she felt the connection to Valerius grow stronger. The ritual was working. She could feel his heartbeat in the back of her mind. Thump, 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 thump. It was getting louder. It was getting warmer. Every soldier she knocked back, every bit of magic she threw, she sent a spark of life back to the bed, where the king lay frozen. "Look at me, Kaelin," she roared, her voice amplified by the white spirit. The Alpha stopped. He looked at her, and for the first time, he was afraid. He saw the purple veins. He saw the silver fire. He realized he hadn't lost a weak healer. He had created a god of vengeance. As the light from her body blinded the army, the Silver Moon soldiers began to break. They weren't fighting a girl. They were fighting the mountain itself. They were fighting the spirit of every outcast they had ever stepped on. Chapter 39. The King of the Broken. In the distance, a roar ripped through the mountain air, and the earth truly began to scream. It wasn't Seraphina. It was a sound deeper than any storm, a sound of a predator who had just come back from the dead. From the gates of the sanctuary, a massive black shape erupted. "Valerius!" Seraphina gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. He was a shadow of fury. The black wolf was back, and he was larger than ever. His golden eyes were like two burning suns in the gray morning. He didn't just run. He flew across the snow. He crashed into the flank of the Silver Moon army like a black tide. Because they were two parts of the same soul, Seraphina and Valerius met in the middle of the battle. The chemistry was electric, a visceral, physical pull that made the air hum. She didn't have to look at him to know where he was. They moved together in a midnight run of blood and steel. He was the tooth, she was the flame. Together, they were unstoppable. They were a dance of predator and prey, but this time, the prey was the army that had tried to divide them. Following the king's lead, the rogues of the sanctuary poured down from the ridges. They weren't just defending a fortress anymore. They were taking a kingdom. They fought with a jagged trust in each other, a family built on scars and shared pain. The Silver Moon soldiers, who only fought for duty, couldn't handle the passion of those who fought for love. "Finish it," Valerius's voice echoed in Seraphina's mind. Chapter 40. Breaking the Gilded Cage. While the remaining soldiers fled, Seraphina found herself standing face to face with Kaelin. He was alone now. His golden armor was dented and covered in soot. He looked around at his fallen army and then back at the woman he had once collared like a dog. This isn't how it ends," Kaelin screamed, his voice high and desperate. "You are my mate. You belong to me by blood and law. I belong to the mountain, Kaelin, Seraphina said. Her voice was calm. It was the calm of a queen who had already won. And I belong to myself. Moving with a slow, deliberate grace, she walked toward him. Kaelin raised his sword, but his hand was shaking so hard the steel rattled. Seraphina didn't even draw a weapon, she just reached out. A single white-hot thread of magic shot from her hand and wrapped around Kaelin's throat. It looked exactly like the silver collar. How does it feel, Kaelin? She asked, her voice a low, dangerous purr. How does it feel to be the one on the end of the leash? She didn't kill him. She didn't have to. With a flick of her wrist, she snapped the spirit bond he had used to track her. The thin, invisible tether between them didn't just break, it evaporated into the cold air. Kaelin fell to his knees, clutching his chest. He wasn't an alpha anymore. He was just a man. A small, scared man in a suit of shiny, useless silver. As the sun finally broke through the clouds, Seraphina turned her back on him. She didn't need to see his defeat. She only needed to see the man waiting for her in the center of the throat. Chapter 41. The Birth of a Kingdom. Following the silence of the battle, the other alphas, the ones who had been watching from the ridges, stepped out into the light. They had seen everything. They had seen the White Spirit's power. They had seen the Rogue King's resurrection. They saw the broken things standing tall and unified. We do not recognize this territory, one of the alphas shouted, though his voice lacked conviction. Valerius shifted back into his human form. He stood tall, his chest covered in scars and the marks of the battle. He stood next to Seraphina, his hand resting on the small of her back. The heat of his body was a sizzling physical romance that everyone could feel. Then you will recognize our teeth, Valerius said. His voice carried across the valley, cold and final. This mountain is no longer a hiding place. It is a kingdom for the rejected, the scarred, and the different. And anyone who tries to put a collar on our people will find their own heads on a pike. Because the light of the White Spirit was still shining, the other packs didn't argue. They saw the ancestral fortitude in Seraphina's eyes. They saw a woman who could heal a whole nation or burn it to the ground. They bowed their heads. They recognized the sovereignty of the sanctuary of shadows. The war is over, Seraphina declared. She looked at Miri, at Silas, and at the runts. No more cages, no more hiding. Today, we are home. In the distance, the Silver Moon Pack retreated, taking their disgraced alpha with them. The gilded cage was broken. The gift had become the queen. Chapter 42. A Crown of One's Own. 1 year later, the Sanctuary of Shadows was no longer a secret. It was a city of stone and light built into the heart of the mountain. Flowers grew in the cracks of the training pits. The infirmary was full of laughter and the smell of sweet herbs. Seraphina stood on the high balcony, her hair long and white catching the afternoon sun. She didn't wear a silver collar. She wore a crown of woven mountain laurel and black iron. Beside her, Valerius watched her with a hungry focus that hadn't faded in a single day. How could I have been so blind? She whispered, looking out at the city where being different was the highest honor. How could I think that safety lay in a cage when it truly lived in the heart of a monster? I'm not a monster, Seraphina, Valerius murmured, pulling her back against his chest. His hands were warm, and his voice was a sultry, low rumble in her ear. I'm just the man who was lucky enough to find you. As they watched the sun set, a group of young shifters ran through the courtyard below. Some were missing limbs, some had mismatched eyes, but they were running fast. They were running free. There was no more fear of the poachers. There was only the future. Ready for a run? Valerius asked, his gold eyes flashing with a playful, predatory spark. Always, Seraphina replied. Moving together, they leaped from the balcony, shifting in midair. A massive black wolf and a radiant white spirit hit the ground and took off into the woods. They weren't running from anything, they were just running. In the kingdom of the rogues, The moon was always bright, and the heart was always free. The end. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the journey of Seraphina and Valerius. Their story may have ended, but yours is just beginning. Subscribe now to join the pack and stay updated on my latest werewolf romance releases. I'm Grace Cruz, and I'll see you in the next